could fill that out. It does ask some general questions about your medical wishes, but it's primarily naming somebody to act on your behalf if you can't speak for yourself. So the first question that we asked in the agenda is, what is advanced care planning to complete an advance directive? And quite simply, advanced care planning is the process that involves figuring out what's important to you if you were in a medical emergency or end-of-life situation where you weren't able to speak for yourself. And that planning process is answering specific questions in the form and also talking to your family and your medical team about what your values and wishes are, so that when you do complete your advance directive, it is something more than just completing a form. It actually has some thought behind it and really reflects personal values and goals that are important to you. As we talked about, because advanced care planning and advanced directives are managed according to state law, each state in the United States has their own rules and regulations about advanced care planning and advanced directives. And in some places, as we discussed, the terms used are different. So in other words, in Vermont, you have a healthcare agent, and in Massachusetts, for example, you have a healthcare proxy. Another term that you might have heard is durable power of attorney for medical affairs. All of those terms equal having named somebody that can speak on your behalf if he can't speak for you. Another term that you might have heard is living will. Again, living will is the same as in Vermont having an advance directive. There are also some other terms that aren't specifically related to advance directives, but you might hear of these terms, and it's good to be familiar with them. And in Vermont, we have a form that's called a COLST, and that's a clinical order of life-sustaining treatment. And in Massachusetts, for example, that same form is called a MOLST. And in some states, it's called a POLST. So you might hear those terms. And what a COLST, a MOLST, or a POLST is a declaration of what kinds of treatment you would want at end of life. You may have also heard the term DNR, do not resuscitate. A DNR is incorporated in the COLST form in Vermont. And you also probably have heard the term PCP. That's your primary care physician. And you may also hear of the term of a hospitalist. A hospitalist is the physician that generally treats a person when they're in the hospital. And historically, if you were admitted to the hospital, you were always admitted by your primary care physician, your family physician. But today, most people that go into the hospital are admitted and are treated while they're in the hospital by a hospitalist. So those are some important terms to know in relationship to advanced care planning and advanced directives. Hannah?
Okay, thanks. So the next topic on the agenda is thinking about your values and goals. Can you guys all hear me okay?
Yep.
Okay, just want to be sure. And I think it's helpful to think about values in lots of different ways, because it's easy to think about your own individual values, personal values. You might have cultural values, you might have family values in your own sort of individual group, your partner. You might have spiritual or religious values, but what do those mean when it comes to talking about how you want to experience or make decisions at the end of your life? So your values are going to guide your decision making for yourself. They will also guide your agent's decision making, the person who's going to make decisions for you. And I also want to say, just because we're talking to people who might have parents or grandparents that they might be making decisions for, that's another way in which talking about your values and exploring those, that might actually help you when you're helping somebody else make decisions. So I think there's a lot of value in thinking about this. Sometimes people aren't sure how to articulate their goals about end of life, and I have certainly fallen into that category myself at times. But I think it was helpful that I have a few sort of ideas or suggestions about how to think about values at the end of life. One is draw on your own personal experiences. So almost everyone has had an older relative or a friend or a parent or a grandparent who has died. And oftentimes you know multiple people who are in that category. Oftentimes you have looked at that situation, you have felt, wow, that went okay. Like that makes sense to me. I wish if I could make a decision, that's how I would want to have the end of my life be. You might also have a situation where you're like, that is absolutely not what I would have wanted. So then thinking about that situation and sort of, going through it, like, what does that mean? Like, what was it about that situation that made you feel uncomfortable or made you feel like that could have been a good end of life for you too? So I think drawing on your personal experiences is really, really helpful. Having conversations, I have found just like talking it through with my spouse, with my family, with friends. I talk about this stuff with a lot of my friends, and just bouncing my ideas off of theirs and hearing what they say. Sometimes I'm like, wow, I never thought about that. I know. So I encourage people to have conversations if you don't feel really clear or you just feel like you want some more ideas about this. Another helpful concept that has helped me and helped, I think, some of the clients that I've worked with is this idea of like, where do you draw the line? Like, what's your baseline in terms of your end of life? When would you want to stop care? For people of different ages, that is going to be, or different situations, healthcare situations, that's going to be a very different answer. Like, where do you draw the line? What's your baseline? And just to give you a few examples, I have a friend in California who died really young. He was a dad. He died, I think, at age about 40, and he had cancer. His primary goal early on was treatment, because he wanted to be a dad. He wanted to be there for his kids. As things progressed and his cancer, he was a science guy. So prognoses, probabilities, that all made sense to him. So as things progressed and things didn't look so good, his still bottom line was being a dad, but he's shifted his treatment to hospice care for the last month of his life so that he could be home and be a dad instead of being in the hospital. So that's one story that might help give you that sort of concept of a baseline. I had another client that I worked with who she talked a lot about how dance was really important to her, and not being able to dance would be really awful for her. She felt like if she couldn't dance, then she would probably want to stop treatment, at least curative treatment. But then we kept talking about it. She was a very philosophical type of person, and she ended up actually later in the conversation realizing that dance for her is about interaction and connection with people. And that was what really mattered to her at the end. So she decided it wasn't so much about whether or not she could dance, it was whether or not she could interact and connect with people. That was her baseline. So she figured if she got to the point where she couldn't do that anymore, that's where she wanted to draw the line. Just one other third example, I had another client who decided their baseline was need to be able to have coffee on the porch. Like, if I'm not going to improve enough that I'll be able to go home and have coffee on my porch, then that's my baseline. I'm done with curative treatment. I don't want to go on. This is someone in their 80s, so I think it made a lot of sense for them. So give some thought to sort of like your baseline, and that will change as you get older or as health conditions change for you. So I think that's kind of a helpful concept. So I would encourage you to just think about it, explore it. It's a fun topic actually to explore. I know that sounds kind of weird, but I've had some really great conversations with friends around this. I'm also known in the advanced care planning group for having sort of like parties where I have groups of my friends and we come together and we talk about this stuff. And sometimes the conversation gets weird and goes in lots of different directions, but I found it really, really helpful. And people actually, if they want to talk about it, they're really interested in talking about it in a group, like a small group. So the next, sorry, I went on about values for a little while. Naming your healthcare agent. This is super important. We talk about this a lot in our volunteer group. This is also a case where you might be serving as an agent for a parent or a grandparent or an aunt or an uncle or a friend. So you might want to keep some of this in mind for that role as well. I would say that important criteria are someone you can talk to. You need to be able to feel comfortable talking to them about your values, about your wishes, even when you're not sure, even when it's sort of a gray area. You need to be able to trust them. You need to be able to feel that they can make a decision even when it's hard, even when things get weird, even when things are gray. You want them to be able to lean in the direction that you want them to go, even when things get difficult, as they do. Healthcare is not black and white. Like, there's a lot of gray in terms of decision making. So someone who can hold that sort of ambiguity and be comfortable with it and not panic if things get weird and gray, that's the kind of person that you want to have as your agent. Your agent does not need to be a family member. And I have a lot of friends who have their agent is maybe their partner who's, it's not a formal sort of partnership. But I would say, based on my conversations with clients, like, it's important to make sure your family knows who your agent is. Because if you don't actually want your family to make your decisions for you, you can avoid a lot of trouble for your agent by telling your family who your agent is. And, try to smooth the way for your agent if it's someone who you think there might be difficulty from people who feel like they have an obligation to make decisions for you. They cannot be a family. They cannot be your agent. Let's see. Sorry, I had something weird on my notes there. They need to be 18 or older. I think it's better to have someone who's close proximity to you, geographic wise. Sometimes people will have a backup agent who might be someone they're close to, but maybe they live farther away. We kind of steer people away from having two agents with equal power. Sort of, it's good to have one agent and then you can have a backup. But if you have two with equal power, that makes it hard for the healthcare team because they might need to contact both of those people. If they can't get everyone on the same page, some decisions might be delayed. So in terms of so that's the healthcare agent. I would also say if you can't do anything else, or like right now you can't deal with thinking about your values too much or that sort of thing, identify the person who's going to make your decisions for you. That's probably the most important thing. So there's two forms. There's the short form, which is 6 pages long, but it's actually not that hard to fill out. I would say that's a good form to fill out if you have it in you to do it, but if you don't, just go with the agent form. You can write stuff on the back of the agent form about some of your wishes. You can have all the conversations that you want with your healthcare agent, which we really, really encourage you to do, because that's the important stuff. It's great to write the stuff down, but the conversations that you have, that back and forth that you have with the person making your decisions for you, that helps you, because you're going to be able to make better decisions for yourself. Because remember, you're in control until you can't respond or make decisions on your own. Then your agent makes the decisions for you. So definitely have those conversations. That's what they're going to rely on. I'm an agent for my parents, and I feel there are things I still don't feel like I know completely, but I feel like I have enough knowledge from my conversations with them that I feel like I could proceed in at least the right direction. maybe every decision I would make wouldn't be exactly what they would do, but I know which direction to go. And I think that's really the most important thing that you can do for your healthcare agent is give them a direction. So I think that's back to Don now.
Yeah, and would also add in terms of the different forms, if you go online and Google advanced care planning, advanced directives, you're going to find many forms, some that have been developed that are state specific, and then some that are more universal. There's one form called 5 choices, or five choices, 5 wishes. And that is one form that is legally accepted in, I think it's 42 states out of the 50 states. We also have a form that's specifically for Catholics. We also have a form that's specifically for veterans. And we also have a form that is specifically for people who practice Buddhism. So there's, as Hannah said, the conversation is almost more important than the form. And the evolution of advanced care planning and advanced directives is such that originally it started in 1976 in California. And now the emphasis, as Hannah said, it's the conversation. It's the sharing of the information with your family and with your your physician, so that they have an understanding of what's important, as Hannah said, and what values do you have that would impact and help them know in terms of what your medical treatment should be. And on most of the forms, variety of the different types, Catholic or the Vermont form or the New Hampshire form or the Massachusetts form, most of the forms have specific questions about certain medical procedures. And these medical procedures are the type of procedures that would happen in an emergency situation. For example, CPR. What would you want done if you stop breathing? Would you want a ventilator? Another question has to do with feeding tubes, and another question has to do with antibiotics. Those are kind of like the big 4 treatments of what you would want done in an emergency situation. And if any of you have been following everything that's going on with COVID, the whole issue of ventilators has become really very central to any conversation about the treatment for COVID. And that's part of the process of answering the questions on the form about these medical treatments is, what would you want done if you needed to have CPR? And what we try to do at Taking Steps Brattleboro is provide information, factual information about statistics about the success of CPR, for example, at given somebody's age and medical condition. And oftentimes what happens is people have a television idea of what the results are with CPR. We watch the medical shows and we see the medical team rush in and start performing CPR, and suddenly the patient is up and moving around and life is beautiful. What we try to do is we try to give factual information so that when you're answering that question about CPR, you have an understanding that it oftentimes can cause more damage, and the end result is that it's not necessarily prolonging someone's life. And what we think is also important as part of advanced care planning and answering the questions on the form is making sure that you talk to your medical physician. Perhaps you have a strong spiritual religious practice to talk to those people about the choices that you're making on an advanced directive form. And again, the whole idea, and you'll keep hearing recurring themes in this conversation tonight, it's the idea of making informed choices before you're in the middle of a crisis. And that's what advanced care planning and having an advanced directive form is all about. And then, as Hannah discussed, after you've made your decisions, it's really very, very important that you talk to your family, you talk to your agent, you talk to your physician, and you talk to your religious advisors or other people that are important in your life. So, Hannah?
So what happens after you finish the form, whether that's the agent form or the advanced directive form? We recommend that you send it to the Vermont registry. That's actually a nationwide registry. The state of Vermont happens to pay for Vermonters who want to file a copy with the registry. The advantage of doing that is that it's always on file there. I appreciate it because they send me a yearly reminder. Do I want to update it? And that's kind of a nice thing to get if you don't have a doctor who does that for you. And also a physician, if you travel a lot, physicians in emergency rooms can access your advanced directive. So if you don't have it on you or they don't know who your decision maker is, if you're in a car accident in Idaho or something like that, there's a little sticker that you can put on your insurance card and on your driver's license. So that's a way that somebody could be like, oh, this person, is registered. We'll look up who their agent is, and here's their phone number. Boom, they can get started more quickly with figuring out what treatment you would want if you get in that type of situation. Of course, your hospital should probably get one, the medical records department. If you are based in Brattleboro, the advanced care planning team can do that for you and send it in. Give one to your physician the next time you go in. I know my physician actually doesn't have a copy of mine yet. She keeps asking for it. And then your agent obviously should have a copy of it, and any family members that you think it might help if they had a copy so that they would have it in writing as well. It sometimes makes a difference when people see your wishes in writing as opposed to sort of, oh, well, I heard, Hannah wants to do this or not, but I'm not really sure. So I think sometimes that can make a difference if you think it might be contentious. Hopefully not. There's some sections on the advanced directive form that you can look at: organ donation, funeral planning, that sort of thing. My bit of advice on that is, based on working with quite a few people, don't get bogged down. Do not get bogged down by those details. You can just write in to be determined by my family, or you don't even have to fill it out. I know too many people who have gotten bogged down by the funeral planning and the organ donation. So the most important part is that your values and wishes are on there as in whatever way makes sense to you, and who your agent is. So great if you have ideas about that stuff. Definitely fill it in. All those options and questions and spaces are available for you, but don't get bogged down by it. The form has to be witnessed by two people. They cannot be family members, and they cannot be the person who's your decision maker, your agent. So you'll have to find some other people. A lot of people have a friend or a neighbor. When hospice office is open, we often witness things for people as well. So just remember, your agent can't do it and your family members can't do it either. I think that's back to John.
Yep. And then since advanced care planning and advanced directives have started, one of the big issues that oftentimes comes up in families is the whole issue of dementia. And we will, if it is of concern for a person completing their advanced directive, we'll provide some suggestions for how one would choose to be treated if they had different stages of dementia. It's not necessarily exactly like an advanced directive when you can't speak for yourself, but it does give your family and your medical team some direction of how you would want to be treated if you had the diagnosis of dementia. So that's an additional form that we can include as part of your advanced directive. And as I mentioned, COVID-19 has become the big issue, and many different organizations have developed an advanced directive for how a person would want to be treated if they were diagnosed with COVID-19. That's another new addition. And then some of you may have heard of, in Vermont, Act 39, and in Massachusetts, they're trying to establish physician-assisted, I don't want to say suicide, but physician-assisted end of life. And that's what Act 39 is in the state of Vermont. And Act 39 has been in existence now for 7 years. It can't be part of your advanced directive because in order to take the medicine to end your life, you have to be fully conscious and functioning. So it's not something that is part of an advanced directive, but we like to mention it to folks just to inform people that we do have in the state of Vermont the opportunity to work with a physician if you have a terminal illness and you would like to be in control at the end of life. And the theory is what people want is control in their life, and that's why someone would choose to have the medication. But we like to provide information about that so that folks are knowledgeable and familiar with some of the different terms associated with end-of-life issues. The last topic on the agenda is just for me to give you a brief overview of Brattleboro Area Hospice. We have been in existence for 40 years now, and the services that we offer, we have an early care program, which is for a person who has a life expectancy of about 2 years. We have volunteers that will work with a person during the last 2 years of their life to provide emotional support, help with chores, be there to take someone to a medical appointment, just to be there in the last 2 years of life. We also have a hospice program, which is for someone that has a life expectancy of 6 months. And again, it's emotional support, helping folks around the house with chores, etc. It's being a person that you can feel comfortable talking about death, end of life issues, or not. It's a very popular program. Then we also have a program called spiritual counseling. We have a person that will work individually with folks who would like to explore spirituality as it relates to end of life issues. We also provide loaning of medical equipment. And unfortunately, right now with COVID, we're not able to have that service, but that is another service of hospice. We also have a very extensive library that the community is free to use. As you can imagine, it's books and materials related to end of life kinds of issues. We also have the community garden, which is on Guilford Street. It's a very peaceful, beautiful spot to memorialize people that have passed. We also have the Hallowell Singers, which is a group of, I think, about 40 volunteers who will come and sing at end of life during a vigil for someone who's passing. It's a very beautiful service that is, again, one of those services that we can't go into people's houses right now, but we can stand outside and sing. So that's a really remarkable service that we have at hospice. And then many of you may know of the store, Experience Goods, that has been in existence for 30 years, and it's set to reopen on July 7th. So we're always looking at people to donate. Experience Goods is down on Flat Street in the Transportation Center. So those are the services that we have for hospice. And I thought at this point, we'd open it up for conversation and questions. And as Casey said, have Lana and Hannah sort of talk about what it's like to be a volunteer at Taking Steps Brattleboro. And I'd like to welcome Amanda. We didn't get a chance to talk when we started our meeting, but Amanda, welcome. It's nice to see you. And so if anybody has questions, or if you'd like to think about what your next step is in terms of either completing your advanced directive or updating your advanced directive or living will or healthcare proxy in Massachusetts for Katie. So we'll open up the conversation, and Amanda, maybe you can start the conversation and kind of tell us your story about, do you have an advanced directive if you live in Vermont? And if you don't have one, what's kept you from having one? And let's just open the conversation.
Hi. Sorry to have been a bit late. I had a child to finish feeding. I do live in Vermont, and I don't have an advanced directive right now, and it is one of those things that kind of sits in the back of my mind that I know that I should have. And haven't really had any experiences in my family with people who we've had to have those kinds of conversations about. But I'm a planner, so it's something that I will probably use some of this time at home to actually think about and get it done.
Great. Here's an interesting statistic. 20% of the population in general and medical people actually have a completed advanced directive. So it's one of those, for a variety of reasons, people, and I haven't figured out what the real reason is. I can speculate, maybe Hannah and Lana can also speculate, but it's one of those tasks, even if you're a planner, somehow always gets put to the back, always gets put on the shelf, and I'll get to it. And what we try to do, I'll share, Casey, my perspective as a volunteer, is we try to figure out what's keeping someone from completing their advanced directive and try to figure out how we can overcome that barrier so that you do have a completed advanced directive. And it's also important, thinking about advanced directives, it's the kind of thing you hope you never need to have and you never need to use, that you never lose consciousness in the hospital, or you never lose the capacity to speak for yourself. But it's always nice to have it just in case. So
my experience has been that doing an advanced directive is kind of like going to the gym for me. In other words, I know I should do it, but I would never do it if I am not working with a trainer and I have an appointment and I have to show up. And I think that in a way is the biggest service we provide is, we will, and this is a free service, which not many communities have people who are trained facilitators, but not affiliated with a hospital or a clinic, and can just help people to sit down and fill out a form, which is not really the point, but have the conversations and then document the things that come out of those conversations, and do it in such a way that you really don't need to dread it. It can be, as Hannah was saying, an enjoyable conversation. One of the things we love about doing this is we get to meet so many interesting, diverse people coming at this process from so many different directions. But that conversation makes it happen. So it may be that making an appointment is all that you need. And now we're doing it online. I mean, by phone or Skype or FaceTime or whatever is most convenient. So it can be, for some people, especially parents, this is a particularly busy time, but for other people, it's a time when they do have free time. So it can be a good time to do it. depending on your circumstances.
I would also add that my experience with working with people and getting these done is that people are so relieved when they finally get it done. They're like, oh my gosh, I don't know what took me so long, but like, wow, I'm finally glad I can check that off. That's done. Knowing that, like, especially if you're on the younger side, you're probably going to have to redo yours or amend yours at some point. And I know I'll have to redo mine at some point, but there's just a relief at like having done it. And even after you finish it, you might still have the conversations, and it's great to keep those going, but it is a big relief to get it done, especially if you've never, especially if you're in a situation where maybe your decision maker isn't super defined, depending on your life circumstances. Knowing that you've designated someone and had that conversation with them, and they know that they're going to make decisions on your behalf, and you feel comfortable with that, that's a big relief.
I have to say thank you. This has all been very helpful information. And I come from the background where my father was a funeral home director. So he was like growing up very open about talking about like, you know, the next stages after he passed away. But never did he ever talk about this piece with me. He always told me to make sure I knew where I wanted to be buried or cremated, etc., but not this piece. So I think this is very helpful and something I need to start putting thought and energy into.
The other nice thing about having it, it avoids family disputes when there's a loved one in the hospital and one person thinks that the patient would want this and another person thinks the patient would want this, or this is what they would want for the patient, and that's the position they're going to take in the conversation with the medical staff. I was a hospital administrator primarily in Florida, and I used to get these families that would come in from all parts of the country, and there would be these like wrestling matches about what does mom or dad, how should mom or dad be treated. And one of the really benefits of having an advance directive completed is it lays out the framework for the decision making, and it doesn't pit family members against each other because they think they know what dad or mom or brother or sister would have wanted. So that's one of the any study that they do about advance directives, that's one of the real benefits, is that it's a gift to the family because it avoids a lot of discord at a time when there's emotional distress already. So it's really important to have an advance directive, and I want to stress how important, and Katie, having grown up in the funeral business, old people aren't the only people that die. And a medical emergency can happen at any time. It's a 20-year-old out riding a motorcycle and something can happen. So it's so important for anybody over 18 to have this document in place. And different states have different rules about legally who can speak for a person who's unable to speak for themselves. And having the advance directive form kind of clarifies that you've designated a specific person. So it's really important. It is a legal document. It's very important to know that when you're filling out the form that it is a legal document. Another important fact, you don't have to answer all the questions on the form. And as Hannah talked about, some people get waylaid with some of the questions. You don't have to complete all the questions on the form. So don't let that become a barrier.
So that actually was one of the questions that I had, was what the legal status of it was. So if one is completed and let's say my husband is designated as my agent and is making a decision based on what is in the advance directive, and my mom says, no, that's not what we're going to do. It is actually a legally binding thing that we've completed.
Yes, and in fact, there has been case law where physicians have been sued for not following the advance directive. So and as more and more cases become decided, the law gets more and more certain. Leonard, do you want to add a comment to that?
Yeah, I just wanted to say that what makes it legal is the signature, the formality of the execution. Most of the time that doesn't matter. It only would matter if there is a dispute, of course. But it doesn't matter what form you use. It's not any particular form, but pretty much all states require the execution with the 2 witness signatures. There may be a couple of states that require a notarization, but they're not in this part of the country. So around here, I think that it's the 2 witness signatures and you're having to witness your execution. And that's what makes it a legal document. So doesn't matter which form you use.
In regards to forms, so as a Mass resident, do I need to look up the Mass form or one of the ones Massachusetts recognizes, or could I use the forms you all sent, even though it's a Vermont form?
If you go to www.vtethicsnetwork.org, Vermont Ethics Network, vtethicsnetwork.org, there's a space that says forms, and if you go to click on forms, then they'll bring you to the next screen, and it will say out of state forms, and you can find the form for Massachusetts. We also have those in our office. If you have difficulty, let me know, but you should be able to find it at vermontethicsnetwork.org.
Great, thanks, Don.
Which is a great site. We're very fortunate in the state of Vermont to have this organization that is really on top of advanced care planning, advanced directives, and updating forms, and we're really very progressive, I think, in the state of Vermont.
With respect to registration, Vermont pays a fee and sets up a registration for Vermont residents. But the registry itself is a national registry, so anybody can register their advanced directives, and I think it's like $59 for 5 years or something like that for people from outside of Vermont. So you just go to the U.S. Living Will Registry or something like that, but that's what it is, the U.S. Living Will Registry. There's several registries, but that's the one that we use primarily.
So I know my mother, she's a Vermont resident. I believe she has an advanced care directive, but she gets most of her treatment in New Hampshire. So would she have to then either pay for the registry or just make
she's
sure
a Vermont resident, then she doesn't. And she should you should ask her. In fact, all 3 of y'all are young enough that you probably still have your parents in a situation where they can still make their decisions, and this would be a good time to ask them if they, and find out if they do have one. Tell them see if anybody knows where it is, because an awful lot of people get it done when they have their will done, but then they put it in a drawer somewhere and nobody knows that it exists, much less where it is. Even their agent doesn't know. So you can educate them in that regard.
And one of the benefits of working with Taking Steps Brattleboro, we have a red folder that we put the people's advanced directive in so they can always find it. And don't ever put it in a lockbox. And oftentimes when we work with folks who want to update their advanced directive, we'll ask them, well, where's your existing form? And as Lana said, that most people don't know where it is. So it's really important. It's, Amanda talked about being a planner. This is another one of those planning tasks, is to be organized and know where it is and make sure that it's available.
I also recommend just doing a PDF of it and putting it on your phone. Then you have it right there. So that's easy enough.
The wonderful electronic age that we live in.
That's a really
Any
great
other
point.
questions or comments? Casey, do you have an advanced directive?
I don't. So this is actually incredibly helpful for me. You know, and I'm thinking about, you know, my family's experiences. I think this is a good opportunity for me to, in addition to, you know, do this and have that step taken care of for myself, also just having the information so that I can be better informed around, you know, supporting other people in my family who may be, you know, healthcare agents, you know, seems really valuable as well. So.
Yeah. Well,
y'all have our contact information and everything.
Absolutely. So, Don, if someone wants to support Brattleboro Area Hospice, other than getting some really cool new things from Experienced Goods, what would you recommend? You know, how would you recommend they pursue that?
Well, go to our website, Brattleboro Area Hospice, and follow us on Facebook if you're into Facebook. And right now, because of COVID, we've kind of stopped doing any volunteer training, but if someone has an interest in becoming a volunteer, contact Brattleboro Area Hospice and we'll figure out a way for folks to get involved. I think like most businesses and organizations, we're still trying to sort through how to integrate COVID into our management and operations right now. So it's really a time of transition. And COVID-19 has sort of brought up this issue of you never know when something's going to happen that's going to cause a medical event in someone's life where they might not be able to speak for themselves. So we think having advanced directive is really important.
Great. Thank you so much.
All right.